Where, when, and how the first Americans arrived has long been one of the most fascinating mysteries in human history. But behind those questions lies an even deeper and more profound mystery. Who exactly were the original ancestors of the first Americans? For decades, scientists searched for the early populations that eventually gave rise to the first peoples of the Americas. Clues suggested that the answer might lie somewhere deep within northern Asia. Now, an extraordinary discovery in the Arctic wilderness of Siberia is bringing researchers closer than ever to identifying those earliest known relatives of Native Americans. The story begins in one of the most isolated and unforgiving regions on Earth, far above the Arctic Circle in Russia's Sakha Republic, along the banks of the Yana River. In this landscape, winter temperatures regularly drop far below -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and the ground remains locked in permafrost for most of the year. Beginning in 2001, a team of archaeologists uncovered an Ice Age settlement that would come to be known as the Yana Rhinoceros Horn Site. This location sits deep within northeastern Siberia at more than 70 degrees north latitude. Its location is extraordinarily far north, hundreds of miles beyond what many researchers once believed was physically habitable for early humans during the harsh extremes of the Pleistocene Ice Age. Excavations at the site revealed thousands of remarkably preserved artifacts scattered across the frozen ground. Stone tools, mammoth ivory points, carved decorative objects, and the butchered remains of massive animals were found throughout the area. Among these discoveries were the only human remains recovered from this time period: 2 teeth belonging to 2 young males. These teeth had been buried beneath Siberian permafrost for tens of thousands of years. Their discovery immediately drew the attention of scientists from around the world. If these human remains were truly as ancient as the surrounding environment suggested, they could provide direct and undeniable evidence that humans had mastered survival in the high Arctic far earlier than anyone had previously believed. As archaeologists continued their excavations, they carefully documented the positions of more than 2,500 artifacts and collected organic samples for scientific analysis. The surrounding sediments contain the massive bones of Ice Age animals such as woolly mammoths, Pleistocene horses, steppe bison, and woolly rhinoceroses. In fact, the presence of distinctive spear shafts and tools carved from the durable horn of the woolly rhinoceros is what gave the archaeological site its name, the Yana Rhinoceros Horn Site. However, determining the true age of these human remains required precise scientific testing. Researchers used accelerator mass spectrometry radiocarbon dating, a highly sensitive form of radiocarbon analysis used to estimate the age of ancient organic materials. This technique measures the remaining amount of the radioactive isotope carbon-14 in bones, teeth, and other biological remains. By comparing it with stable carbon isotopes, scientists can determine how much time has passed since the organism died. When the samples from the site were analyzed, the results were remarkable. The data confirmed that the 2 individuals had lived approximately 31,600 to 32,000 years ago. This discovery made them the earliest known humans ever identified in the high Arctic of Siberia. It pushed back the timeline of human occupation in this extreme environment by tens of thousands of years, long before the last glacial maximum. Yet perhaps the most remarkable insights into their lives would ultimately come from their DNA. A team of researchers led by geneticists at the University of Copenhagen launched a genetic investigation to better understand the ancient populations of Siberia and their connection to the peopling of the Americas. The researchers extracted DNA from the enamel of the teeth belonging to the 2 32,000-year-old individuals, along with genetic material from dozens of other ancient human remains discovered across Siberia, Beringia, in the Americas. In total, the research team sequenced the genomes of 34 ancient individuals, covering a time range from a few hundred years ago to nearly 32,000 years in the past. The genetic signatures of the two young males from the Yana rhinoceros horn site, dated to roughly 31,600 to 32,000 years ago, turned out to represent a completely distinct and previously unknown ancient human population. Researchers officially named this newly identified lineage the Ancient North Siberians, or ANS. When scientists compared the DNA of these ancient Siberians with the genomes of modern and ancient populations around the world, they uncovered a striking connection. These individuals shared roughly 1/3 of their ancestry, about 33%, with the indigenous peoples of the Americas. These groups include populations whose descendants today are represented by communities such as the Caratiana and Surui of the Amazon, the Mixe of Mexico, the Pima of the American Southwest, the Cree and Ojibwe of North America, and the Quechua of the Andes. In fact, these Siberian individuals currently represent the oldest known relatives of Native Americans ever discovered outside the Americas. Their genomes provide the earliest genetic glimpse yet into the populations that eventually gave rise to the first Americans. Further analysis allowed scientists to estimate when the ancestral populations of Native Americans began diverging from other groups in northern Eurasia. By studying patterns of genetic mutations accumulated over many generations, researchers estimate that the core ancestral lineage leading directly to Native Americans emerged from these mixed Siberian populations roughly 24,000 years ago, near the peak of the last glacial maximum. This timeline closely matches previous genetic and archaeological evidence for the origins of the first Americans. The genetic evidence also reveals fascinating details about the deeper ancestry of Native American peoples. By studying haplogroups, genetic lineages passed down through maternal or paternal lines, scientists can trace ancient human migrations across continents, the coastline, or that multiple migration routes were used at different times. At present, scientists continue to debate which pathways were most important. What is clear, however, is that the ancestors of Native Americans emerged from populations living in northeastern Siberia during the Ice Age, and the individuals from the Yana site represent the earliest known relatives of that ancestral population. Their direct descendants, or populations very closely related to them, would eventually continue that immense, multi-generational journey steadily eastward. Eventually, these ancient populations would reach the lands that once connected Asia and North America. From there, the story of the first Americans would begin to unfold. But the genetic legacy of that journey begins much earlier than anyone once imagined. It begins with the Ice Age hunters of the Yana River. Thanks for watching. If you found this video informative, please like, share, and subscribe. And feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.